Well, I'd like to begin by asking you to explain why you asked me to conduct this interview.
Well, I ask you specifically because this book is written around subjects that you and I have talked about a lot, and I've always respected your views about the search for happiness and meaning in life. I think the interview itself is important because when you write a book, you necessarily use words, express ideas in ways that are appropriate to your sensibilities. But the reader may get an entirely different impression from what you say.
Mm.
So, as someone who didn't write the book, you are in a position to be kind of an objective observer and say, well, is that really what you meant?
Mm.
So that's the idea here, is that you can bring out the book in ways that I just wouldn't be capable of, either making a speech or, some other one-sided format.
And what is behind the motivation to write the book? What moved you to write it?
Well, I've been a spiritual searcher really all my life. I wouldn't have called it that when I was 8 years old, but I've always felt that there had to be more. And why does this have to be so hard? And that led me to major in philosophy in college. And,
Mm.
as I explain in the book, Zen and Joseph Campbell and so many things that um, when I hit upon this idea of using computers as sort of a template for how you think about the brain and its limitations, I was really taken with it. And I decided that I had to write about it, both because I wanted to share the idea, but also because I thought it would be a good way to flesh it out and to help me understand it more.
Mm.
And that has, in fact, been the case.
The book really weaves together two two threads: the heartfelt and open sharing of your own life and trials and tribulations, um, and then the explanation of this path that you've developed. And I wonder on the personal side in the telling of your story, if that provided some catharsis for you, if there was an unburdening that happened through sharing that so openly.
I think, well, first of all, maybe more than many people, I've always carried around a template of how I ought to appear to other people. And that was someone, because I run these companies and, been a lawyer and all this stuff. So I always wanted to look good,
Gotta look good.
this guy knows what he's doing, right?
Yes.
And I've worked pretty hard to defend that template. And it is no exaggeration to say that telling these stories, these autobiographical vignettes, which are pretty embarrassing in many cases, and knowing that my friends, my contemporaries, were going to read it was daunting going in. But in the event, it's a tremendous relief. I've come out of the closet.
Mm.
So I'm admitting to the world just how messed up I've been.
That takes a lot of courage, not only for any of us to face that in the privacy of our own space, but then to share it with the world. Um, but that raw honesty is part of what makes the book work so well. There's so many books out there about how to live a better life, and this is not just another one. This one's unique, and I wonder if you could talk about how it differs from those books.
Well, I think there are several things. On one level, the author is very much building the book around, I am building the book around my interior life. I'm not so much giving advice or providing rules or platitudes or nostrums, is I'm saying this is what was really going on. Mm. And on a kind of philosophical level, in terms of the uniqueness of the book, um, it's unlike most self-help books that I have read, in the sense that it attempts to get underneath all the crazy counterproductive things we do at a very basic level, which is from moment to moment. What's happening? Why do these things arise? And when they arise, what the book suggests is that you don't remember some rule or nostrum. You simply ask yourself the question, why in the hell am I feeling this? Where is this coming from? And so I believe that it attacks the downside of the human condition at the very initial fundamental level. And because if you have a nostrum or a principle, your brain will quickly grab that and spin it off into something else and try to make it finite. And this says, no, it ain't finite. It's just, wait a minute. What's happening? Where is this coming from? And what can I do right now in the moment, independent of any of my ambitions or desires to persuade or look good? Just, can I be a better person? Can I think about things I want to think about? So it's very fundamental.
As we get deeper into the subject, in some ways we're walking through a landscape that's littered with terms and words that mean different things to different people. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about how we use a few of those words so that we all, in this conversation, pointing to the same things. And I thought we might start with 4 different words: the brain, the mind, the self, let's say with a small s, and the higher self with a big S. So I think for brain, most of us would say that's the organ inside our skull. When we talk about the brain, that's the bodily organ. Is that aligned?
Yeah, and I would add to that the whole thrust of the book is that the brain was designed to accomplish a mission that is no longer our own. And it has its own independent view of the world that does not necessarily accord with what we in the modern world would like to have.
And do you think we can say that when we talk about the mind, we're talking about the output of the brain, the processes of that organ, what it's spinning out as the mind?
Well, that's a slippery one.
Yes.
Because, yeah, it's terminology.
Yeah.
So, in my way of thinking, mind is that ultimate self. That's an independent authority, an independent impulse from the brain, which is really a processor. In other words, it will certainly happy to process on its own without any influence from your higher self. But I think I work pretty hard to sort of push the brain away. And so when you say that the mind is what the brain produces, I sort of think of it as it's the filter that mind has to push through.
Well, let's jump to self. Maybe that will help. So there's sort of the common self, the small self. I think you refer to it in the book that way. And then there's, some people would say, the higher self. And you're making that distinction in the book. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about how they differ?
I think the reality that we all have an ultimate self that knows what's good and right is the most obvious thing in the world. And every religion, every spiritual tradition at its best recognizes that. Even if you're a politician,
Even them.
huh?
Even them.
Even them, even Darth Vader is going to say that what we want is for people to be free, to be allowed to do the things that they want to do, to live their lives the way they want to, and to enjoy and appreciate their lives. And so this is a fact that's different from Newton's three laws of motion. It is a much more important reality to me than any scientific fact, because it's what makes life worth living.
So you're pointing to when you say higher self, you're pointing towards uh, something that transcends the brain and the body and is present and knowing, and we get really far out on the skinny branches when we introduce the word God into the conversation, right?
The skinniest.
Yeah, the skinniest. But it is, you do go there in the book a bit. So um, I think we should talk about that too, which is, so there's the higher self. Is that the same as God? Uh, or does God include all the higher selves?
Well, as you say, it's all very slippery. What I say in the book and what I'm most comfortable with is that God is the personification of all that is good and right. So, let's just stay with Christianity for a moment. Um, it kind of starts out in the Old Testament as this angry old man up in the sky. But the whole idea that God has intentions and plans and judges us has never made any sense to me, even as a small child. What does make sense to me is that God is the representation of what is good in the world and that God resides in us, but obviously not physical residence like the brain.
The functioning and the implications of the brain are at the core of um, the path you're describing. And as a reader, it seemed to me that you were talking about at least four different aspects of the brain. One of those is the way it's pre-programmed due to evolution and heredity. We have this instrument that's got a lot of programming wired into it when we receive it. The second thing we want to talk about is the autonomous functioning of the brain. The fact that you reference it as your employee, it's supposed to work for you. Um, and the third thing is the limitations of the brain. We were just talking about God, and we bump up against that the brain wants to parse it and conceptualize it, and it can't be. And then lastly, and most importantly, that there are options available to us to change how we interact with the brain.
I think the analogy of the man-made computer is very helpful here. One of the things we know about man-made computers is they are purpose designed to accomplish a specific mission. So modern automobiles might have 30 or 40 processors in them. There's one that controls the anti-lock brakes. There's one that controls the combustion in the engine. They even have a computer that controls how the windows go up and down. All of those things are designed to achieve a particular end. And I think that's important to remember when we're talking about the brain. It's purpose built for a narrowly defined result. And when it comes to evolution, it's important to remember that the brain was not only was it not designed for happiness, it was designed for a different kind of result, which is survival until reproduction so genes could get passed on. But it really didn't care about its owner. Evolution was a process of really sacrifice, of sacrificing all of the things that didn't work and isolating the few things that did work. And in order for that to be true, it has to control it. In other words, for a given stimulus, there has to be a specific response, because the way it worked was that those characteristics which enable survival and reproduction over a wide range of situations, statistically, I think what's even more important in this context is the very nature of computers themselves. They are designed to achieve a specific future result. So when you push that button on the door to raise the window, the computer says, oh, he wants to raise the window, and he wants to raise it that high and no higher. And your brain is constantly searching for that finite future result. It's an algorithm. If this, then that. So if I push that button, that will be the result. And so I think we tend to go through our lives trying to engineer our future. That's what, computers are doing. They're engineering a future result. But life is not about a future result. It's about a present experience.
Just to put a finer point on what you just said, because I think it's critical, is that the brain's programming is, its goal is survival of the species, not the individual. It would encourage survival of the species at the expense of the individual who houses it.
A more fundamental way to say it is, it doesn't care about you.
Right. Yep. It's an important thing to know. So the brain, we're talking now about the way it's programmed, genetically, programmed from evolutionary perspective, survival of the species at the expense perhaps of the individual. But there are other elements to the programming too. There are genetic aspects of it that come from family tree or family history. There are, it's taking in experiences through childhood and all through life. It's taking in more data than it came into the world with. There may be traumas or illnesses or other events that all shape and influence and change the brain. So there are a lot of hidden agendas there that we're not privy to.
Yes, I mean, it just starting with genetics. We talked about my triplet grandchildren, how completely different they are. And then after that, they have different experiences and goes in different directions. So the book is very much about not producing, well, first of all, not producing perfection. Maybe there are gurus, saints who, just transcend this nasty, messy world. This book is not about that. This book is about playing the hand you've been dealt as well as you can play it. Mm. And there's no question that there are people who just genetically are more disposed to happiness. I mean, it's just, the landscape is littered with it. But the idea is that by seeing your brain for what it is and consciously avoiding the things it does that bother you the most will help anyone. Mm. It's not for everybody. This book is not for everybody. Not only is not everybody going to read it, but it's going to resonate with people, I guess, that have some similarities to the life view that I've grown up with.
Sure.
And how many people that is, we'll find out.
Well, yeah, I think that's a wonderful point to clarify, because we are all different, and we're going to come to it with different backgrounds and different tendencies. But as you say, it's not about perfection; it's about improving and
getting better,
making it better. Getting it better. So the second aspect of the brain is the autonomous nature of it. So this quote, to me, aligns very closely with what you're describing. The mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive. To put it more accurately, it is not so much that you use your mind wrongly. You usually don't use it at all. It uses you, and this is the disease. That's from Eckhart Tolle. That seemed to me to align very closely with what you're saying, that the brain is using you, and the failure to recognize that is the cause of suffering.
And that the brain is the source of dis-ease. You are not at ease because you are suffering. And I talk about this at some length in the book, that all of my life, all of our lives, we are diseased by the things that our brains are foisting on us that we would not wish for, we do not want. I mentioned before that the definition of a computer virus is a malicious program that infects a computer without the permission or knowledge of the owner. And I think that's very appropriate to all the unwanted activity that our brains engage in.
So the brain is on its own, that's the autonomous nature of it, generating all this activity, these thoughts. Thoughts lead to feelings and responses. That's the problem.
It's a drama queen.
Yeah. So we're not. Is this a matter of stopping the brain from doing that, or is this a matter of creating a different possibility of response? The brain's going to do it no matter what. Our freedom is not in stopping the brain, but in changing how we respond to it, our relationship.
Well, a way to say it is you can't change the nature of your brain. The brain is going to do what it damn well does. But what you can do is a workaround, which is when these thoughts arrive or it impels you to behave in inappropriate ways around other people, if you can catch it a warning, you can head it off and mitigate the effects. And I can tell you this, Steve, that since I have been working with these ideas, there have been times, particularly when I've interacted with other people, when I have seen the power of just shutting up, not performing, not even exhibiting body language that seems to imply judgment, just listening, just empathizing, that is a spiritual experience. It's touching the ultimate. It's not just, oh, I feel good right now. It's much more than that. It's a release into heaven temporarily. So one of the things I say in the book is that heaven is not a permanent future residence. It's a hotel I check in and out of, depending on how well I can manage my brain. So as much as I work with these ideas, what is my success rate? I don't know how you would quantify that, but it's certainly not across the board. But it is, I have learned to manage it enough that it has been transformative. So the brain's going to keep throwing this stuff at me, going to continue. It's never going to go away.
So let's move on. You talk in the book about the limitations of the brain and the mistakes we make by believing that science has the answer to everything, and that there are the most important and rich parts of life that the brain can't access. You expressed it beautifully, I thought, when you wrote, by seeing my brain as a dedicated mechanical device with limited capabilities, I could see that everything didn't have to be run through its filter, that the gatekeeper shouldn't guard the whole house, but only the mechanical equipment, and that it knew nothing about the living spaces. What a wonderful metaphor and way of describing um, the fact that the brain really is geared towards the mechanical spaces, but there's so much more to life. Can you give us an example when you say the brain can't access that part of life? What part of life can't the brain access?
So I'm fixing dinner, and my brain, I'm chopping vegetables, I'm mixing ingredients, all these mechanical functions. But what I want out of that is really not food. What I want, if Pat and I are alone, is the shared experience. So while I'm doing all these mechanical things, I want her to know that I'm thinking about her. I'm thinking about pleasing her. If I get all caught up in dinner being at a certain time or the ingredients being exactly right, I'm missing it. Yeah, I'd like all those things to come out fine. But what I really want out of it is that shared experience of loving her and having her love me and appreciating that I want to do something to share with her and please her. So they're two distinct things. Yes, I do the mechanical stuff, but that's just the skeleton. But the living meat on those bones is the shared love.
Hmm. And the brain can't help you there.
It actually fights me because it's saying, this has got to turn out right. Dinner's at 7, you're behind the curve. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You quoted Steven Pinker. We are organisms, not angels, and our minds are organs, not pipelines to the truth. Our minds evolved by natural selection to solve the problems that where life and death matters. And it's very good at that. And you be careful to point out the brain is not the enemy. It's not, there's an awful lot of good happening because of it, but it only takes us so far.
Yes.
You wrote, my brain just can't get its arms around God and wants to get on with calculating how to protect myself and improve my future. And that really resonated with me. And there's a passage from a 13th century Christian book called The Cloud of Unknowing that I just find very helpful. And I think it's exactly what you're pointing to. The author wrote, we don't know who the author was, of God himself can no man think, and therefore I would leave all that I can think and choose to love that thing that I cannot think. He may well be loved, but not be thought. By love may he be gotten, but by thought never. And I think what he's pointing to and what you're pointing to are the reality that, however we want to call it, the divine, the ultimate self, the higher truth, the ultimate reality, is not accessible by a thinking brain.
And I think the timing here is very important. An algorithm, which is what the brain traffics in, is about getting a future result. But love, excitement, passion, joy, whatever you want to phrase it, is a present experience. It's opening up to what is, not improving on what is and making it better.
Mm.
That's why I talk about the golden minute that, once the brain takes off,
Yes.
it's hard to rein it in.
Yes. I want to go there in a minute, but just before we move on, you wrote in the book, what we can do is acknowledge that God is in every one of us in a way that can never be described or measured, with no apologies for all the perversions that have been done in the name of God and religion. And having made that acknowledgement, there is something that can be taught, which is what separates us from that God that is patiently waiting inside us. This is teaching the brain to stay within its proper role, which the brain can be taught, just as we teach it to perform management in other aspects of our lives. If I can teach it to tie my shoelaces, I can teach it to stop messing up my life. I'm not sure it's quite that easy. But the principle I get, and I want to ask you more about that. So we move on to talking about how, what options are available to us in dealing with this programmed, self-running, autonomous brain that really doesn't care about our personal happiness and is programmed for survival of the species. What can we do about that? So we're really talking about, you used the term a moment ago, what you called the golden minute.
Yeah, really the golden second. I
Golden
start
second.
with the golden hour, which is, a medical principle for traumatic injuries and
Right.
strokes and so on. And that if you miss that window, it's lost. And what I'm saying is, our brains are very clever. And the British expression, too clever by half. So they can grab something and take off with it. And everything you try to think to even stop it, it can do its own workaround. And you gotta catch it a warning. You gotta say, stop. Just no, not going there, not gonna be that kind of person. And that has to arise instantly. And I think it's not something that you can just come up with the idea and start doing. You have to train yourself. You have to start thinking in those terms. I mentioned that now when I wake up in the morning, I try to grab my consciousness and say, all right, what is this day about? It's not about getting specific tasks done. It's not about disappointing other people or disappointing myself. It's who am I going to be in this day? How accessible am I going to be to other people, or am I going to think positive thoughts? And of course, this stuff's been around forever in a sense. The power of positive thinking, all those self-help books in the 20th century, attitude makes the difference. So this is kind of it's kind of a mental bridge to a spiritual destination. Because you have seen the brain for what it is, you can get to the source of why it's so hard to have a good attitude, why it's so hard to have a positive attitude. Because the brain is constantly defending. What if this bad thing's happened? What if that bad thing happened? Which, of course, for primitive humans, navigating around existential threats was what it was all about. So the brain's designed to do that. And it's going to go there, and it doesn't care whether you're happy about it or not. So this is a way of taking that attitude makes the difference thing to the next level. It's giving you a tool to do better at that.
So let's talk about this immediacy. Why is that immediacy so critical?
Have you ever heard the expression that people engage their mouth before they engage their brain?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, that's what the brain does. In other words, it doesn't say, well, what are you really feeling now, Shep? It says, hey, look at this, look at that. And once it starts down that road, it's very hard to stop. I find that it's the biggest single obstacle in my living out what I'm writing about is even if I catch it in the moment, it'll circle back on me. So it's an iterative process of really training yourself about how you approach life by with the relationship that you have with your brain.
So that's an interesting segue, because when you talk about having a relationship with the brain, relationship involves two parties. So there's the brain, then there's something else, and we're not going to parse whether that's consciousness or higher consciousness or any of that, but we are saying that there is something apart from the brain that is who we are. You wrote in the book, Joseph Campbell and Steven Pinker had helped me to appreciate that there was a me that was not my brain. Yet that appreciation by itself was still at arm's length, something that could be taught in philosophy class. But with these computer principles, I could go beyond the intellectual to the experiential, linking the ongoing useless drama in my head with the workings of a mechanical tool that was constantly letting me know how limited and perverse it was. This allowed me to see it as a limited machine separate from unlimited me. So the relationship, when you say relationship, you're talking about the relationship between the brain, the organ, and the unlimited me. Is that?
Yeah, and it helps me understand the concept of the devil. People are aware that things are arising in them that they don't want and are evil and unhelpful and unpositive. And of course, it's always easier to see it in other people than it is in yourself.
Of course.
But I think I actually personify the brain. I mean, I mentioned these words. You're not going to do that to me anymore. I'm not going to let you get away with this right now. So that's a very personal kind of viewpoint. But it seems to help me to really see the thing as another.
Yes, you're creating some space between this autonomous organ and the higher you.
So, when I use the expression that it's an indispensable employee that refuses to stay within its job description, anyone who's been in business, run businesses as I have, know that you live with employees that you would love to change. You'd love for them to operate, not gossip in the office, not say negative things, not freelance, not be jealous of other employees and constantly grasping and all that stuff. But you still need them. You don't have anybody better to play that role. So you say, I got to live with this. So how can I work around this in a way that limits the damage that person is doing to me?
Yeah, that's a wonderful metaphor. I think anybody in business can relate to that. You said in the book, in computer speak, our brains are noisy. So whether it's avoiding fiery death or dealing with more mundane situations, such as managing diet, exercise, or homework, it has trouble answering the question, what is the most important thing right now, and what should I be doing about it? And I know, as we've talked about this, you've said that question is kind of a key tool or almost a mantra for you, that's the question you ask in that golden moment that helps turn the tide of that interaction.
So it's easy to treat a book like this, a discussion like this, as achieving some transcendent, ethereal result. But I think a very helpful way to think about the brain is how it is constantly preventing you from doing things that you know are good and right. You know they'd be good for you, But the brain it's a great procrastinator and excuse maker. So I know that if I exercise regularly, my life would be better. I mean, exercise really isn't painful. I mean, I guess you could screw it up and make it painful, but it's a very good example. When I was in college, I would have term papers and I would put it off until the last minute and they would be poor. And I knew it going into it. I knew that I would be so much happier if I just got it out of the way. So this employee, he's just constantly screwing up.
Which is a wonderful segue into my next question, which is, um, it, you're saying that this doesn't always work, so it's not a technique that is implemented and then problem solved.
It certainly isn't working on my exercise. I can tell you that. I'm still not doing it.
But can you talk a little bit about the reality of it? I mean, here you are, you've been at this particular way of living for 20 years or so. How, but you still fail. Failure still happens. And I think that's important for people to hear. It's not about perfection.
And again, it's about timing. So I really like to talk about my relationship with my wife because it's so central to my life and the feeling between the two of us. And anybody who's married is very sensitive to this dynamic. So I walk into the house and she says something that I think is not right. Didn't make any sense. And my instantaneous reaction is to say, no, that's not right. That's not the way that works. Here's what's right. Now, I'm not going to persuade her of anything. That reaction to her is not going to do anybody any good. In fact, it's going to do both of us a lot of harm because she's going to take it personally. That's going to affect her attitude toward me for the foreseeable future because I have said you're wrong and I'm right. So like right now in my interactions with Pat, I think this is one of the ways it's worked the best. I just don't contradict her. I just don't say, no, I don't care what it is, unless, the house is about to blow up. I say, okay, you got a choice here. You can show that you're right and she's wrong, or you can have a really nice time with your wife. But it's so tempting to prove how right you are with anybody. But with your wife, I think it's particularly important to say, what's important in this moment? And what's important in this moment in that situation is just to listen and shut up.
You wrote in the book, there is another kind of knowing that is not transmitted from the outside, but arises spontaneously within us, and is so obvious that in the maze of everyday activities, we tend to see right past it. It is not a finite conclusion, but a knowing that comes from asking, am I the person I am capable of being right now? The difficulty with recognizing the self that asks this question is that it is constantly being suppressed by our computational brains. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions, pointers for how we learn to access that part of ourselves that is always present, but is constantly being suppressed by the brain. How do we learn that?
You try. Remember in the book where I talk about the dialogue with my brain in various situations. So you just start doing it. And the first question obviously is, do I like what I'm feeling? Do I like what I'm doing? And then you say, okay, I'm going to say for the moment, that's my brain that's pushing me into a corner I don't want to be in. So I have a choice. This really is about power, that we really have the power to have a happy life if we can head that brain off at the pass. And you gotta have a certain amount of faith in that idea, even to try it. But that really is the answer. You just try it. Maybe you don't try it in the way I suggest in the book. Maybe you try it in a different way. But if you see the brain as that indispensable employee that's constantly doing things you don't want it to do, you say, okay, how can I manage that employee differently?
It's not a technique.
No,
It's a way of being.
try.
Yeah, it's a way of being. But I think I would imagine for most people it is a process like learning to play the piano or lift weights. Over time, with practice and familiarity, you're able to respond that way in increasingly challenging situations. In the beginning, it's probably easier for some people who are new to this to try and practice in relatively low intensity events.
Well, maybe it's more like this. Maybe you've been playing the piano all along and you've been playing terribly, and you are very habituated to how you play the piano. And now someone says, no, listen to this. And you say, oh my God, you can actually play the piano like that. But when you go to play it, you've been doing it this way so long, it's hard. In other words, you're not just doing something new, you're overcoming something that you're very habituated to.
Yeah, that's the conditioning of the mind persists.
And habit is really important. I mean, the brain says, okay, this is the way you look at this. It's automatic.
You and I both lovers of boats and sailing, and it was one teacher described it as saying that even when the wind dies, the waves persist, and I think that applies here that to what you just said. That even though you may shift how you start to learn to see, it doesn't mean that the conditioned mind will stop sending those waves of trouble your way.
Yeah.
We were talking about future outcomes earlier, and I think the way you described it was that the brain was always working on predicting what the future outcome would be. And we were talking about thought, and it seems that thinking is always based on past experience, past memory, and trying to predict future outcome. But the one thing it cannot do is be in the present moment. And in order to do what you're talking about being present in that moment. When the brain hits you with something, and learning to be present. Say, "Whoa, what's happening right now?" Which invites the possibility of saying, "What do I want to have happen right now? What is the highest good?"
We've really known that all along. I mean, live in the present is one of the enduring maxims of how to have a happy life. What is different here is that by understanding the origin and nature of the brain and having the experiential relationship of working with personal computers, and obviously knowing something about neuroscience and how, they're pretty much the same things, that you've taken it to the next level. In other words, just hearing a principle is different from having the ability to visualize what's actually happening and what the source of it is. So that's why I say it's a mental bridge to a spiritual destination.
Mm-hmm.
You've used the brain to overcome the brain, kind of a jujitsu trick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how does this? I'd like to ask you to describe how this differs from just what somebody would describe as self-discipline.
Well, self-discipline is, I got to do this. That's what self-discipline is. This is how I got to get through this. This is how I got to operate. It's discipline can can come out as demand, closing in. But this is not about closing in. This is about opening up. And it's very slippery, right?
No, but it's a
but
very
but
different feeling.
it's a very different feeling.
Yeah.
Um, so we just take um, college essays. Discipline is, I need to get this done. I'm going to drive myself to get this done. And this idea is, wait a minute, what's going to make your life better? Is it writing it at the last minute and all the worry and anxiety that builds up while you know you should be writing that paper? It's getting in touch with a completely different part of yourself that says what's ultimately good. It's not about, I got to do this. One of the things I thought about all those years that I was, driving in business, and I unconsciously related it to a horse race where the jockey is beating the horse. You see him and he's flogging the hell out of the horse. And that's what I felt like I was doing. I was just flogging the horse. Well, that's no way to live. So discipline can kind of slide into that. This is something, it's an entirely different mindset.
But to flesh out your the college paper,
Mhm.
let's imagine that there's a budding romance, and this paper's due. And there's an opportunity to go spend the day with this woman you're falling in love with, uh, and and now the brain is struggling with: do I want to? I should write this paper. What's more important? If I ask myself, what's what will make me happy? What will make me happy would be go have a picnic with this girl. Um, how do you reconcile those conflicting um, possibilities?
Steve, I'm hard pressed to think of a time in my life when my recreation, my excitement, whatever the distraction is, really kept me from doing what I needed to do. I've always had plenty of time. I've just spent, and I think most of us do, we spend most of our time parking our brain, diddling. You know, it. You you get home from class and you say, "Well, what am I going to do now?" Well, God, I just got out of class. I don't want to look at the goddamn books again. But if you do that, then your time with your girlfriend after that, you're so much more free to appreciate the experience because in the back of your mind, that's eating away at you. It's polluting the good experience you could otherwise have. So I don't think it's about competing demands of time. There's always enough time to move and act intelligently.
Well, maybe more broadly, there are certainly it's not always clear what the highest good or the path to happiness is.
Well, I won't just say this, that, and obviously this is all recollection. I was in college 60 years ago, but I can certainly relate it to the present. So I've got I try to carry a list of to-dos, things I don't want to forget, right? And what I know is that if I, start my day, what am I going to do today? I know what the intelligent thing to do is. The intelligent thing is to do the thing that I least want to do. Because then it's put away. The monster is killed. He's not eating at my backside. It's the smartest thing you can do. And that is about being intelligent, real intelligence, which is what is the most important thing right now and what should I be doing about it? Well, the most important thing I should do is to eliminate these nagging speculations, worries, anxieties. You just kill them.
That sounds more like a process of the brain. When you talk about matters of love and passion, matters of relationship, matters of connection with the divine.
No, my brain is the thing that screws that up, because my brain says, no, you don't want to do that. You deserve, do this. No, I don't think that is. I think the brain is the villain in that piece. Anytime you're feeling something that you don't want to feel or behaving in ways that you'd rather not, I say that's the brain's mindlessness.
When we watch the brain lighting up as we weigh a decision like that, there are all these different parts of the brain that are active, trying to sort out, do I do this list or do I not do this list? What am I going to choose in this moment? Because I think we agree that the brain is a powerful tool for certain activities. We need it. It's incredibly effective. And what you're saying is, yes, but not every situation falls in that realm. There are bigger, more mysterious parts of life that are more important than day-to-day activity.
It's an ill-fitting garment.
The brain. I mean,
yes. So the joke is that there's a guy that's going to an event for which he needs a new suit. And so he arrives at the tailor shortly before the event, and the guy's behind the curve. And while he's cut out some pieces for the suit, he hasn't put them together. And the tailor says, I can't give you the suit. And the guy said, I got to have it. I don't have anything else to wear. I got to do it. And the tailor said, well, there's just no time. And the guy says, you got to do your best. So the tailor tacks the whole thing together. And one arm is longer than the other. The lapels don't match up. It only fits right if you kind of bend over. One leg is shorter than the other. So when the guy tries the thing on and says, I can't wear this, you can see it. He says, no, what you do is, he says, you just lower one hip and then the cuffs come out and you bend your neck this way and then the lapels line up and you drop this shoulder and the sleeves work out. So the guy reluctantly leaves the tailor shop and he's going down the street and he's kind of, doing all of these crazy gyrations. And he meets two guys, and after they pass, one guy says to the other, God, have you ever seen such a deformed person? And the other one says, no, but have you ever seen such a great fitting suit? Well, what we're doing in this life is walking down the street in that ill-fitting suit, just doing crazy things we don't want to do, coming off in the wrong way, being in the wrong thing. That's what the brain is. It's an ill-fitting suit that deforms us.
a wonderful story. Sure. And yet we're not saying that the brain is the enemy or is always a problem. The brain is also making a lot of other things possible. And you're booking a flight, you're planning a trip, you're planning an event. The brain is essential. We need it for that.
It's the indispensable employee that won't stay with his job description. So the question always is, are you doing what I want you to do right now?
And my question is, in the example you gave of working out, or let's say, do I want to eat the donut or not? Is that a matter for the brain to resolve, or is that the higher self getting involved?
Well, you're parsing it in a way that I'm not sure I'm capable of responding to. You want the brain to do what you want it to do, and you don't want it to do the things you don't want it to do. So, one of the ways of encapsulating this book is to say that this book is about getting the brain to do the things you want it to do and not letting it do the things you don't want it to do. That's it. It's about this thing is constantly doing things that I want it to do. And I want to eliminate that. But obviously, it regulates my heartbeat, my digestion. It's absolutely indispensable. But it's not your friend, and you got to watch the thing constantly.
Well, I was going to close by asking you to describe the book in one sentence, but you just did.